Hi, my name is Peyton St. Andrews, and today is June 13th, 2019, and I am interviewing John Hobbs at the Newkirk Public Library. What motivated you to join the military?
Well, I didn't join. I was drafted. There's a difference. Back in the 68, 69, 70, there was a draft, and either you joined or they drafted you. Well, at the time I was going to college, my first year, and that was 1970. And after college and stuff, I went to work. I got married after to my wife now, Karen, and I was working at the packing house, and I got a draft notice from the President of the United States, Richard Nixon, and told me that I was to report for induction into the Armed Forces of the United States, and that was at Ponca City at the post office, which I did, and they took us down to Oklahoma City, where we processed in, and we processed in 71, January of 71, in the Murrow building, and that's where I went into the service.
Tell me a little bit about your time in basic training.
Well, it was just like any other basic training. The drill sergeants ran you and harassed you the whole time, and they'd build you up and then they'd tear you down. We had force marches, like 6-mile force marches, but everywhere we went, we ran. And that was pretty much and they taught us different stuff, you know, throwing grenades and stuff like that, and shooting at that time it was an AR-15, and they taught us that, and that's basically what it was. Just teach you about Army life, how to interact and teamwork. But I knew most of that anyway because I was in sports when I was here in Newkirk and high school and stuff, and you learn teamwork real quick there. So that's basically about all I took basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And they called it Little Korea when I went through.
Where did you serve the majority of the time in service?
Well, after AIT training, which I took at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and that was called Little Vietnam, I went from there to Fort Riley, Kansas, and I was with the 1st Infantry Division. And at that time, that was in July of 71, and I was an APC driver, Armored Personnel Carrier, that you get in and drive, and then the guys get in the back, you know. That was what I did. I was a driver. And I served from July till January. We'd just got orders coming in December of different groups that was getting ready to ship out. The first group came down, supposedly was going to Vietnam. Anyway, all the guys, they were kind of whining and crying around, and I said, "Oh, don't worry about that. You probably won't go over there anyway." So anyway, that was in December, and after Christmas, I went back up there, and they had another list of deployments to a different area. Well, it was to Vietnam, and my name was the last name on the list. So I had to report to Fort Lewis, Washington, in January to deploy to Vietnam.
Which medals or citations are you most honored to have received, and why?
Well, the one's a CIB Combat Infantry Badge. That is given, there's only elite few that get those, and most of them are in infantry units because that's what it's basically set up for. And it's, you can't receive one unless you've been in combat where you've been, came in contact with the enemy, and the CIB is a war above all other medals or ribbons or anything that you get. The next citation I received was the Air Medal, and that was for over 25 combat assaults into a hostile territory, which was in Vietnam. And I got a Army Commendation Medal, and of course everybody gets a National Defense Ribbon. And then I got a Vietnamese service and a Vietnamese campaign. and that was the medals that I got. Plus we got 2 presidential unit citations and 1 Vietnamese unit citation.
Tell me about some of the special people you met.
Well, one of the special people I met was my platoon sergeant when I was with my last group there before we came back to the States. His name was Sergeant Roberts, and he was telling me one day when we were sitting out there in the field that he was a Green Beret, and he told me that he said you'll never hear this from anyone else. He says, but he asked me, he says, you remember Che Guevara? I don't know if you know who Che Guevara was or not. Che Guevara was Fidel Castro's right-hand man, and he was kind of a overthrower. He liked to overthrow governments and stuff like that for communism. And he went to Bolivia, and the Bolivian government had the United States bring his Green Beret team over there, and they captured Che Guevara and turned him over to the Bolivian government. And he said, I watched him walk in. Watched him walk into a room, and he didn't walk out. And he said, but you'll never hear that from anyone.
What was the best and worst military food you were served, and why?
The worst military food?
And the best.
Well, have you ever eaten sea rations? And the worst one of the whole sea rations is the eggs. That's the worst ones there is. They have different ones in there. They have we called it beef and shrapnel, which was beef and potatoes, and they had pork, and they had beanie weenies, and they had fruit cocktail, they had cigarettes, and I lived on the crackers, the peanut butter and crackers is what I lived on. That's what I eat mostly.
Tell me a funny story you experienced that could only happen in the military.
Well, the funniest one I remember, of course, there wasn't a whole lot of funny stuff going on, but I remember we had just gone up, we had to go up and tear a fire base down. I don't know if you know what a fire base is, but a fire base is a artillery deal that's up on a hill, and they have to bring everything in with helicopters, and they only have one way to get in if you walk. But it's on a hill, and it's got concertina wire and stuff around it, and bunkers and stuff, and that's where we got a lot of our fire support from the field if we needed it. Well, we had to go up there and tear that down. I've got pictures of it in my deal of where we tore it down. And anyway, we'd come down off the hill, and we'd set up for the night, and we made our kind of little hooches and stuff. We called them hooches. That was what we slept in. And we made them out of poncho liners, and we just, little strings and tie them up and stuff just to kind of keep the water off you because it was wet over there all the time. And I remember, of course, I used to sleep like a rock when I was back here in the States, but when I went over there, it just seemed like every little thing just, I don't know, your senses just seemed to be a little more so than what it is. But anyway, I was laying in there in my little hooch, and I felt something on my chest, and I opened my eyes, and it was a big old rat was on my chest looking at me right in the face. And that was kind of about the only really funny thing that really happened while I was there.
Were you deployed overseas, and if so, where and for what?
I was deployed in 1972 to South Vietnam, and I landed in Da Nang Air Force Base, and I stayed there the whole time. That's where our company worked out of, and that was the farthest north that American troops were stationed at that time. It was only about 25 miles from the DMZ, and that was what separated North Vietnam from South Vietnam. And I was there till we came back in September. They sent us back home in September because they stood us down and sent us home.
What was the most demanding part about your development?
Pretty much most of it was deployment. was humping the 90-pound rucksack every time you went somewhere and carrying that radio. That's about what it weighed, because I had to carry the radio, 2 extra batteries, all the water that you carried, in which I had a big water blivet in the back of mine, plus my canteens, plus we had to hump 60 rounds of machine gun ammo, which is, and plus all of our ammo that we used on our M16s, plus hand grenades. I had carried hand grenades, plus smoke, because when you was talking to the Hueys, which were the helicopters, we use a lot of slang, but anyway, the Hueys when they'd come in, they would ask you to pop smoke, because a lot of times the NVA or the VC, which was the local communist people, they would listen to your radio traffic, and then they would pop smoke. And if you didn't confirm the color, the Hueys would go over there and they'd attack them. So when you pop smoke, you'd tell them confirm color, and they would confirm the color to what color we had: yellow, red, and green. And so they'd confirm what color it was, and then they'd come on in and sit down and load us up and take us back out.
How did your military experience affect your life today?
Well, I didn't know until I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and I didn't know I had that until I went to the VA, and they told me. Anyway, that's pretty much how it's affected me, that part of it. Other than that, I felt that I was no different than my uncles and my dad. I had an uncle that served in World War I in the Navy, and the uncle that I was named after, Uncle John. And then I had 2 uncles and my dad, my Uncle Dan and my Uncle Mutt, which was my dad's brother. Uncle Dan served in the Navy in World War II, and Uncle Mutt served in World War II, and so did my dad. So I didn't feel that I was any different than them when they were, asked to do their duty, and so I felt that I had to do mine too.
What is the best military food you had?
Well, the best military food I had was when I was stationed at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and they were just going into the all-volunteer Army, and they had a mess hall where you could get anything you wanted: steaks, hamburgers. You just told them, and they'd fix it for you. And that was the best meals I ever had the whole time I was in the service. Although when I was stationed in Vietnam at the Da Nang Air Force Base, the Air Force had excellent food. And a lot of times we'd sneak in there and eat at the Air Force Base because they was open 24 hours a day. Okay, these are some of the books that I brought up to show that during my military service. I believe this one's right here. Yeah, this is one for my basic training. This is the ones for when I was stationed at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. And this is a picture of my whole battalion there. Not battalion, but my company. And this goes over here, and this is when I was at Fort Polk, Louisiana, and that was my outfit there. And these are just pictures taken at Fort Polk, excuse me. Anyway, this is just pictures of it. And this here was when I was stationed at Fort Riley, when I was with the 1st Infantry Division, and this was the APC that I drove over there. And we also went on a reforger, which at that time the U.S. and Germany and other NATO countries would get together and they deploy to show the Russians. At that time, that was still when it was considered a Cold War, and we'd run war games over there. And there's pictures of this is
that was held in Germany, correct?
This was held in Germany, and that's Adolf Hitler's tower that he and his mistress stayed in when he was would stay and watch all his troops parade around him. And we was all over Germany in different towns and stuff. We started out in Stuttgart, and I think we ended up getting out of Munich. And there was a guy when we was out in the field. He had a horse, and I asked him if he'd let me get on him. And that's a picture of him letting me get on his horse. And that's the APC that I was driving over there and stuff. And that was when I was at Fort Riley. And these are when I was in Vietnam. And this was my platoon when I was in Vietnam. These were all my buddies. Randall Hobbs was one of them. Was in there. He was from North Carolina. I didn't even realize that he was even a Hobbs there till later on after we'd been in there a while. And these are just pictures of the area and stuff, the guard towers and stuff that was around the compounds. And like I said, these are pictures of that was me taken out in the field with my AR. And that's my hooch. That's what we stayed in. We just made a little place to stay out of the rain as much as we could. If you wasn't on a night ambush deal, which they send out every so often. And when you first get in country over there, they give you it's not a magazine, but it's a book, and it tells you all about your time, supposedly going to be timing while you're in Vietnam, and it tells you the different units. See, that's Da Nang right there. That's Da Nang right there, and that's a DMZ right there. And at that time, when I was over there, that was the farthest North American troops were stationed. And they, just before I left, they started bringing the Russian T-34 tanks across the DMZ, and then they was issuing us laws out in the field so that if we ran across one while we was out there looking for them, we could disable them. But this just tells you different stuff that went on. A lot of this was, we worked three different areas when we was up there. We worked the mountains, the jungles, and the rice paddies. We had 3 areas we worked in. Or down south mostly was rubber plants, the plantations and stuff. They had a few jungles and stuff. But and then just before we got ready to come back home, we was turning the everything over to the ARVNs, which was the South Vietnam Army. And this is pictures of it, of us supposedly coming out of the field. And this is where they're standing our colors down to bring them home. And this was back in, I seen this laying, I don't know why I picked this up, I just seen it laying on a table, and I just grabbed it and kept it. But it says Monday, August the 14th, 1972. And it's even got, it's got different stuff in here. It's basically a newspaper, and it shows different stuff going on. They was doing a lot of protesting back then, and some of that stuff was, they tried to keep most of that stuff out of there. So, but anyway, that's what this stuff is, and I think that's just about everything I've got.